Disclaimer, there are a lot of fast-moving images in this video. So if you're sensitive to fast-moving images, it's maybe a good idea to turn on all of the lights in your room and watch this from a safe distance from your screen. Thank you. Today on my channel, where I draw and sometimes talk about the things I draw and/or animate, I've accumulated footage of doing the pen and ink work for 27 comic pages, and we're going to go through them all at an increased speed. So we're going to go through all of these pages based on how I recorded everything. That's the idea, so let's get started. One thing I found fun about recording the pen and ink work for all of these pages is that doing the ink, just the line art I suppose would be a good term, for all of these pages, is obviously it's very time consuming, but you get into a sort of rhythm when you work at it for long enough, and by the time you do so, you know, each page has a story, each page has its own sort of mood, its own emotion to it, which is really fun. By the end, it feels completely different. This page in particular, page 1, or what was originally conceived as page 1 before I reshuffled the order a little bit, is the main character walking through the woods with her groceries at night. So, you know, I felt the need to dedicate a page to the environment and her isolation. This comic in particular was for a class for university. If I remember, the day when I did the ink work, the line art for this page, I'm fairly certain I was listening to the entirety of Hadestown, which, if you are unaware, is a musical. Musicals in general are a really good way to make the time go by, especially if you're working on a comic or an animation. At least that's what I found. But yeah, I really enjoy listening to musicals like Hadestown or Hamilton, of course. But yeah, another good way to make time go by. I'm fairly certain later, and I don't believe I've left in any audio from the actual footage. But I'm fairly certain I listened to like a good chunk of Futurama as well. And I forgot how good that show is. It's a really good show. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that, but you know, if you haven't seen it already, what are you doing? Tools I use, just normal microns. Different ones include the 8s, I believe the 8 nibs, and 3, I believe. I had a bit of variation with, you know, brush pens I generally use for a lot of larger lines and line weight. I end up using a lot of cross-hatching. And of course I did go in and clean up any errors. So if you see like me going through and doing a word bubble, and then there's a very clear error, I did clean that up digitally. Any error I've done in here, I ended up going through digitally, so, you know, the benefit of hindsight. Page 2 and 3, so I ended up switching the order for this page right here that you're seeing right now, which was originally page 2, but then it just made more sense to have a sort of title page to sort of lead into the story proper, instead of abruptly cutting to a title page. It actually made no sense, so, you know, again, benefit of hindsight. I tried getting into a kick, a sort of pattern, I suppose, would be a good way to put it, where I would do 2 pages. So the video camera I was using to record everything with, I had on my tripod. I had everything on my tripod, obviously. But then I had it stare down at my desk while I was drawing. Occasionally you might see like my chin in there, something dumb like that. But I would go through, detail everything utilizing my, or rather just do the outlines first, do the paneling, the word bubbles first, because you just want the framing down. And of course that's done through all of the sketching I had accomplished before I hit record. But generally what I do is I do the characters after the paneling, and then I go through and add small details after, you know, characters, background, their environments, what have you. But anyway, like I was saying, I tried to get, based on the amount of space my camera was able to record at the time, I would go, okay, I'm going to do either 1 or 2 pages, and then I'll take a break for like 40 minutes or however long it takes to upload to my Google Drive. And then I would go through, upload everything, and then continue. So it's a good way to, you know, keep pace. So at this point I was only doing 1 pages for a little bit, and everything that I've told you about the process is the same, essentially. So, you know, going through doing paneling and word bubbles first, continuing to, you know, after that you do the characters, their environments, backgrounds, and details. Something that's fun about looking at the footage of this is remembering, what was I listening to, like I said earlier? What was the mood, generally? Usually I'm very tired when I believe I was just tired in general during the entire pen and ink process for this particular one-shot. But that sort of worked based on the story I was telling, about this very downtrodden, isolated animator, and all of a sudden she gets this crazy roommate that like bursts through her living room, through space and time, and it's like, oh, I live with you now. So that was just fun to sort of like, oh, what would it be like if a person from the future burst into my room and was like, hey, I live with you, and it's like, what? No, you don't. Get out. So anyway, that's basically what that is. Again, a lot of cross-hatching to get extra details down, though I do admit to overworking a lot of shadows and cross-hatching. Occasionally it can be messy, but you know, that's the process of learning. Don't really make any mistakes. One thing I'll never forget that I learned in university is, I remember one time I went, oh, I'd rather fail first and then I'd do good. And I remember the professor who I was telling this to looked down at me and it's like, you're not failing, you're learning. And I was like, oh yeah, that's true, isn't it? And for some reason that always stuck with me. It's just, you know, something to keep in mind. That it's like, oh, everything didn't come together. Oh, I'll never be good at what I want to do. Oh God, and it's, you know, you're just learning to do different things. Of course, you're not going to be good immediately. But anyway, yeah, just a fun story, I suppose. Page 5 was an interesting challenge because there's a smartphone in the first big panel that required a lot of really steady use of the ruler, and if it's not obvious based on the dumb, just idiotic amounts of tape I'm using to hold everything steady. I'm not very good with the ruler. If it's not apparent through the erratic line art, generally I'll just go back and make everything super bold. I find that's just a really fun, I suppose emphatic is a way of showing that sort of really, like, I love the use of really bold line art to make a character distinct from a background. Occasionally can, you know, be a challenge if you're doing very horizontal or vertical artwork, which most of comic making is that, you know? So I don't think it hurts to, you know, use tape to hold the ruler down. A lot of people I've crossed, just whether it be online, are like, oh, you can't do that. It's not what you're supposed to do. Well, you know, as long as you get the artwork you want to get finished, then eventually you won't need to use the tape as much, and what was once something that you weren't sure about became, you know, a skill, and that's super cool. This particular recording for page 6 and 7, I had a few corrections to make. Before I went down into the pen and ink, I believe it was Faye, the girl with the ponytails, sitting in her chair, needed to be zoomed out a bit to make the composition of the first panel read better. And again, generally I'll go in, I'll do the paneling and word bubbles first, and then I'll go back and do all of the pen and inking and small details. It's really fun to see the amount of work I did on this in fast motion. It's really quite a nice way of reflecting upon the amount of time I spent. Really cool. Nothing else to say on that front. It's like, oh my god, did I really do all that? And it's like, yeah, I did. It's nice to have all this footage. I'm glad I decided to record everything. And one of the fun things about recording yourself doing something like this is noticing a lot of the errors you make, and it's like, okay, cool. I'll know to maybe try a different tactic the next time I do a one-shot comic. Page 8 and 9 is more of the same, so there's no need for me to comment on anything else. 2 pages done in the span of about an hour and a half to 2 hours, based on the amount of footage I was able to record at once. And then I go through and make sure everything looks as good as I can make it, essentially. Errors or no errors. Ten and 11 were very interesting pages, because as you can clearly see, I tended to mess up the composition a lot. So I've been the whole video going on about how errors are fine as long as you learn from them, and that's 100% true. But when you mess up in the middle of your process, you need to make sure to keep your eyes peeled, because you don't want to make more work for yourself. And that's something I'm still learning as an artist and cartoonist and animator and comic author and what have you, or comic artist, I should say. Well, I do write the stories too, for my one-shots, but anywho. Is that, you know, you don't want to make more work for yourself. One of the best things you can do as an artist, in my opinion, is working in pen, generally so you have more confidence in where to put your lines, to either create a form or an environment, or just generally get the emotion of the character you want to. An extra few lines can, this is really obvious commentary, but you know, an extra few lines can decide the emotion of a figure or an environment. All of a sudden it could be nighttime or daytime or what have you. One thing about my characters, now that I'm looking at, or rather the characters in this one-shot in particular, a compliment I remember getting when I showed the almost finished one-shot when I was doing the grayscaling and what have you, screen tones digitally, is that my characters are really expressive. And that's something that obviously takes a lot of practice. I personally think they could be even more expressive, that the emotion could be pushed even more in some cases, because a lot of the time the faces will look the same, or it's the same sort of face of despair or anguish that I end up drawing. But one thing I liked about this page in particular are Faye. Again, her bangs are sort of moving through the air. I basically have no hair, so it's eternally an enigma for me to draw. But generally when it's a character sort of in shock, you want to make the hair, everything move too. It's fun to just look back on the amount of variation you can give in a character when it comes to expression, and how far you can push it in some cases. That's something I find very interesting about the drawing process. Alright, here we go, 12 and 13. Page 12 and 13, for whatever reason, I had a lot of energy that day. So the day I did pages 12 and 13, I, for whatever reason, maybe I had double the morning coffee that I usually had, maybe I got more sleep than I usually did. For whatever reason, maybe I just had more time that day. I sat down and did a crazy amount of pages. For whatever reason. I believe this was in the morning, and you'll see the lights start to change slightly. But I don't believe I moved from my seat. I think I just put on a bunch of podcasts or, YouTube shows in the background. And that's one thing about making one-shots, especially comics and animations, is that you'll be going at your pace that is good for you, and then all of a sudden, you'll have crazy bursts of inspiration along the way. Speed bumps, I've heard people refer to them as. It's very interesting to look back on, especially at this point in the story, where the characters are showcasing a lot of emotion. So it's almost like supercharging that burst of inspiration, where it's like I get out of bed, have breakfast, get some water, sit down for I don't know how long, and you're going to just keep drawing. And that's one of the cool things about doing projects like these, is that you just never know when that's going to hit. And not that it didn't hit, otherwise I wouldn't have even bothered making a comic of this length, let alone that it was, for a class. The fact that it was for a class was sort of, part of the inspiration, but it's not that I was behind or anything. This was in advance. I had this done a while before the deadline, but something about artwork I find very interesting is when the artist is super passionate about something, you definitely see it. And you don't want to, when they're not, you can totally tell as well. But I believe I got up to page 22 or something that day. And there are 27 pages in this entire thing, so make of that what you will. Yeah, more of these crazy expressions that I find very fun to draw. I believe up on the top of this page that you're seeing right now, there will be the rare use of stippling to show a small burst of calm before the storm. That's something I would like to do more of, is change up the variation of artwork in my one-shot comics, or illustrations in general, because if you stick to one thing for too long, it'll become stale, not just for you, the artist, but for whoever is consuming your artwork as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. So as you can clearly see, the title of this segment is page 14, 15, and 16. I don't know if it was the composition. It most likely was the composition of the next few pages. A lot of the panels are gigantic. You'll see a lot of pages get done really quickly. And I don't know what sort of, I guess, came over me? Is that a way to put it? I don't know what possessed me to gain the ability to get so much done so quickly. It's great looking back at it that I was able to do something so fast. And not that I don't. Usually my turnaround times are very fast in general. But they're never this quick. I guess I did have like twice the amount of coffee that morning, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's fun to look back on, especially when you have it all recorded. Pages 17, 18, and 19 are more of the same. Somehow, I don't know how, I got 3 pages done in a very succinct amount of time. And I believe you can even see it through my right arm. I wear compression gloves while drawing, because you don't want your hand to deteriorate from doing so much work. And again, I am taking breaks in the middle of all of these, which makes it even more startling, I suppose, in hindsight, that I was able to do so much. But I wear compression gloves, I wear an arm brace. Occasionally I'll take it off to do a few more polished lines, and I need to focus a lot. And I also wear an elbow brace. But I've been working for so long, I might have missed it when I maybe got up to use the bathroom or get lunch or something. My brace completely shifted around, and I did not notice it. So you'll see that if you pay attention to my right arm whenever my elbow brace comes into frame. Whoops. Yeah. Make sure your braces are on correctly. You don't want to do more damage inadvertently. I believe this is where I hit my limit for the day. This particular day of working, I got up to page 22, and I believe I got halfway through page 22 before I called it quits for the day, and I believe it was because my hand started to really hurt. And you know, inspiration is a great thing, especially if you're an artist, but just pace yourself more. You don't need to do this many pages that day unless you're on a very strict deadline, of which I was not. I was so far ahead, I guess I was able to justify the amount of work I did in this particular case. But yeah, pacing yourself is a good thing to remember. Something I tend to forget occasionally. In fact, more than occasionally. Passion is a good thing to have. Just don't deteriorate your drawing arm in the midst of it. Not that I did in this particular case. It's just something to keep in mind. In fact, I'm fairly certain on the recording, I remember looking back at the footage once it was done, and I believe the exact words I said were, "That's it, I can't do any more today." And I put my pen down and turned the camera off. Which is a very, like, yeah man, you earned it. You earned the right to say that. The rest of page 22, and then all of page 23 was a new day. I don't want to say it was the next day, I want to say it was a few days later. It was just finishing the work, essentially, at that point. Once you're this far in the project, it becomes second nature. Your process, when you approach this, a particular work for so long, the work doesn't really get away from you, but it really takes on a life of its own, and you're sort of just putting pen to paper and creating what the project is sort of turning into, which I find very interesting. But yeah, more of the same. There's not much need for a commentary over this part. So pages 24, 25, and 26 are the end of the one-shot, but not the end of the video necessarily, and I'll comment on why. Well, I guess I can now. I did forget one page. I forgot to draw an entire page. I suppose while I was in a trance from doing so much work in a short amount of time, I looked back at my notes, I looked back at my thumbnails, and I realized, oh my god, I completely forgot to draw a page in the middle of everything. So yeah, it's a good thing I caught that, otherwise that would have been a mess. But I believe that was also from revisions as well from my professor, where he said, you should add a page here, this would make more sense, and I was like, you're absolutely right. And that's another thing when it comes to art, is always be open to criticism. In fact, getting critiques is some of my favorite parts of the process at this point, because it always, whether you accept the critique or not, opens your mind in a way when it comes to your process or the kind of work you make, whether or not, you know, it's basic things like the story making sense, or whether the illustrations flow, the composition getting too messy, like I said earlier. You want to make sure that it doesn't just make sense to you. And that's a very obvious critique, but it's something I forget. Occasionally when, you know, I'm sure I'm not, obviously many artists get in their heads all the time, so yeah, it's just something to remember, is maybe show your work to at least one other person. In this case, it was my professor and a few friends, but you know. Never be afraid of criticism. It can be the thing that aids your work the most. So here's the page I forgot to draw, and I don't believe I had a notation for this. But it's actually 27 pages. That was a flub on my end. But yeah, you can see the entire process of going off of my thumbnails and getting the composition down. And again, I go through, I do the word bubbles, the paneling, make everything. Oh yeah, I guess there's the rest of the footage, and I guess there's the notation. I believe this was slightly later in the day. I had to take a break, of course. Never a bad thing. Always take breaks to make sure you don't overwork yourself. And yeah, that's basically the end of this entire video. Let me know if you enjoy anything like this, because I found it very fun to chronicle the process of an artwork of this scale. Who knows, I might do something else like this the next time I decide to draw a comic like this. I do a weekly comic strip titled Edna and Clyde. I post it on my comics blog and my Instagram. If you would like to follow that, the links are on the screen and in the description. The I also have a Patreon. If you like the work you see here and would like to help me create more often, feel free to contribute if you feel so inclined. But yeah, that's basically the end. So thank you for watching. This is a very long video, longer than I thought it was going to be actually. But yeah.